gang leader pushed Mike Tyson's daughter at school. Didn't know her father was the baddest man on the planet. The afternoon sun cast long shadows across the parking lot of Lincoln High School as parents gathered in their usual clusters, waiting for the final bell. The air carried that peculiar mix of teenage energy and exhaust fumes, punctuated by the distant sound of lockers slamming and voices echoing through hallways. Among the crowd stood a young girl, no more than 15, her backpack slung over one shoulder as she scrolled through her phone near the school's main entrance. Her name was Michaela, and nothing about her suggested the storm that was about to unfold. She was small for her age, quiet, the kind of student who kept her head down and minded her own business. Her father had taught her that strength wasn't about seeking confrontation, it was about knowing when to walk away. But today, walking away wouldn't be an option. The rumble of motorcycles shattered the peace. Parents instinctively pulled their children closer. Teachers standing nearby exchanged nervous glances, but said nothing. Everyone knew who Blade was, and everyone knew what happened to people who challenged him. Michaela barely looked up from her phone. She'd seen men like this before, all noise and posturing. Her father had taught her that real power didn't need to announce itself. She stepped slightly to the side, intending to give them space and continue waiting for her ride. But Blade had other plans. He dismounted his bike with deliberate slowness, his boots hitting the pavement with heavy thuds. His eyes scanned the crowd, feeding off the fear he can see in their faces. Then his gaze landed on Michaela, and something twisted in his expression. Maybe it was the way she hadn't flinched at their arrival. Maybe it was the fact that she seemed completely unimpressed. Whatever it was, it ignited something dark in him. "Hey, little girl," Blade called out, his voice dripping with mockery. "You deaf? Didn't you hear us coming?" Michaela glanced up briefly, her expression neutral. "I heard you," she said quietly, then returned her attention to her phone. The crowd gasped. No one spoke to Blade like that. No one dismissed him. Blade's face darkened. His two companions, a hulking man with a scarred face they called Tank, and a wiry guy with wild eyes known as Razor, moved to flank him. "You got a mouth on you," Blade said, stepping closer. "Someone needs to teach you some respect." "I'm just waiting for my ride," Michaela replied, her voice steady but quiet. "I'm not looking for trouble." Blade laughed, the harsh sound that echoed across the parking lot. "Well, trouble found you, sweetheart." He was now directly in front of her, invading her space. The smell of cigarettes and motor oil clung to him. "You know who I am?" Michaela looked up at him with eyes that showed no fear, only a quiet weariness. "No," she said simply, "and I don't care." The words hung in the air like a slap. Tank and Razor exchanged glances, their expressions a mixture of shock and anticipation. They'd seen Blade explode over less. "You don't care?" Blade's voice dropped to a dangerous whisper. "You're about to learn a very important lesson about respect in this neighborhood, little girl." He reached out and grabbed her backpack, yanking it off her shoulder. Books and papers spilled across the pavement. A notebook flipped open, revealing careful handwriting and drawings. Michaela's homework for the week scattered in the breeze. "Oops," Blade said with mock innocence. "Looks like you dropped something." The crowd watched in horrified silence. A few parents pulled out their phones, but no one moved to intervene. Fear had paralyzed them all. A teacher took a half step forward, then stopped, her face pale. Everyone knew what happened to people who crossed Blade. Michaela knelt down slowly, beginning to gather her scattered belongings. Her hands were steady, her movements deliberate. "It's okay," she said quietly, more to herself than anyone else. "It's just stuff." But Blade wasn't finished. He kicked at the papers she was collecting, sending them flying again. "Just stuff?" he mocked. "That's right, just stuff. Just like you're just some nobody kid who needs to learn her place." Tank and Razor laughed, cruel sounds that made parents pull their children even closer. One mother covered her young son's eyes. An elderly man, watching from his car, gripped his steering wheel so hard his knuckles turned white. But he didn't move. No one moved. Please, Michaela said, still kneeling, still gathering her papers. I don't want any problems. Just let me get my things and I'll move. Her voice carried no challenge, no defiance, just a simple request for peace. But to Blade, that quiet dignity was an insult. He'd built his reputation on breaking people, on seeing them beg and cry and crumble. This girl's calm was unacceptable. You'll move when I say you can move, he snarled. Then, with deliberate cruelty, he placed his boot on her hand as she reached for a textbook. Not hard enough to break bones, but enough to hurt, enough to humiliate. Michaela gasped, pain flashing across her face. That's better, Blade said. Now you're learning. In the crowd, a little boy tugged on his mother's sleeve. Mommy, why isn't anyone helping her? He whispered. His mother's eyes filled with tears as she shook her head, unable to answer. The truth was too ugly to speak aloud. They were all afraid, every single one of them. Blade removed his boot and Michaela pulled her hand back, cradling it against her chest. She looked up at him, and for the first time, there was something else in her eyes. Not fear, but a deep sadness, as if she pitied him. You don't have to do this, she said softly. Whatever you're trying to prove, you don't have to prove it on me. The words seemed to enrage Blade even more. I don't have to prove anything, he shouted. I run this neighborhood. Everyone here knows it. He gestured wildly at the crowd. Tell this little brat who I am. The crowd remained silent, frozen. A few people nodded weakly, but no one spoke. Their silence was its own form of submission. Blade turned back to Michaela, his face twisted with rage. Get up, he commanded. Michaela slowly rose to her feet, still clutching her injured hand. Her backpack lay forgotten on the ground, its contents scattered like debris after a storm. She stood straight despite the pain, despite the humiliation, and that quiet strength only made Blade angrier. You think you're tough? He sneered. You think you're better than me? Before Michaela could respond, he shoved her, hard. She stumbled backward, her arms windmilling as she tried to catch her balance. She hit the ground hard, her shoulder taking the impact. A collective gasp rose from the crowd. This had gone too far. Even by Blade's standards, putting his hands on a child crossed a line. But still, no one moved. Tank and Razor shifted uncomfortably, exchanging glances. Even they seemed uncertain about this escalation. Boss, Tank said quietly, maybe we should… Blade whirled on him. Maybe we should what? You going soft on me, Tank? Tank immediately backed down, raising his hands in surrender. No, boss. Just saying, she's just a kid. Blade turned back to Michaela, who was slowly pushing herself up from the pavement. There was a scrape on her elbow now. Blood beginning to well up. Her phone had skittered away, the screen cracked. But her expression remained eerily calm, almost resigned, as if she'd been through worse and survived. Just a kid, Blade repeated mockingly. Just a kid who needs to learn that in this neighborhood, I'm the law. I'm the one who decides who gets respect and who gets taught a lesson. He moved toward her again, and this time something in the crowd shifted. A man in a business suit took a step forward, his jaw clenched. A woman pulled out her phone, fingers hovering over the emergency call button. The teacher who'd hesitated before finally found her voice. That's enough, she called out, her voice shaking but determined. I'm calling the police. Blade laughed. Go ahead. Call them. By the time they get here, I'll be long gone. And everyone here knows better than to identify me. He was right, and the teacher knew it. Her hand trembled as she lowered her phone. The defeat in her eyes was crushing. Michaela was on her feet now, swaying slightly. She looked around at the crowd, at all the adults who were supposed to protect children, who were supposed to stand up to bullies. She saw their fear, their shame, their helplessness, and in that moment, something in her eyes changed, not to anger, but to a deep, profound disappointment in humanity. My dad told me people like you exist, she said quietly, her voice barely above a whisper. but somehow carrying across the silent parking lot. He said there would always be people who mistake cruelty for strength, who think fear is the same as respect. Blade's eyes narrowed. Your dad sounds like a real philosopher. Where is this wise man? Why isn't he here to protect his little girl? It was meant as a taunt, but Michaela's response was simple and devastating. He taught me I don't need protecting. He taught me that real strength is staying calm when people try to break you. He taught me that bullies like you are just scared little boys pretending to be men. The parking lot went completely silent. Even the wind seemed to hold its breath. Blade's face turned purple with rage. No one, absolutely no one, spoke to him like that. His hand moved to his belt, where everyone could see the outline of something metallic tucked into his waistband. You just made the biggest mistake of your life, little girl, he said, his voice deadly quiet now. I'm gonna make sure you and your daddy both learn what happens when you disrespect me. He reached for her again, and this time his intention was clear. This wasn't going to be just a shove. This was going to be real violence. The crowd collectively held its breath. The teachers screamed. Parents turned their children away. And Michaela stood her ground, not because she was brave, but because she had nowhere left to go. Blade's hand was inches from her collar when a voice cut through the tension like a knife through butter. I wouldn't do that if I were you. The voice was deep, calm, and carried an authority that made everyone freeze. It came from behind the crowd, near the street. Heads turned in unison. A black SUV had pulled up to the curb so quietly that no one had noticed its arrival. The driver's door was open, and a man was stepping out. He wasn't particularly tall, maybe 5'10", but there was something about the way he moved that commanded attention. He wore a simple black t-shirt and jeans, nothing flashy, nothing that screamed for recognition, but his presence was undeniable. He moved with the fluid grace of a predator, each step deliberate and controlled. The man's face was partially shadowed, but as he walked into the light, recognition began to ripple through the crowd. The jaw, the distinctive facial tattoo, the way he carried himself with absolute confidence. Oh my God, someone whispered. Is that? Another voice, louder. It can't be. But it was. Mike Tyson walked through the parted crowd like Moses through the Red Sea. Parents stepped aside instinctively, their fear of Blade instantly replaced by awe. The former heavyweight champion of the world, the baddest man on the planet, was walking toward them with purpose in every step. Blade's hand had frozen in midair. His face had gone from purple with rage to pale with recognition. Tank and Razor had both taken involuntary steps backward, their earlier bravado evaporating like morning mist. Dad, Michaela said, and the relief in her voice was palpable. Mike Tyson's eyes never left Blade as he walked, but when he spoke, it was to his daughter. You okay, baby girl? His voice was gentle, concerned, a stark contrast to the legendary ferocity he was known for. I'm okay, Dad, Michaela replied, though her voice shook slightly now that safety had arrived. Just some guys who thought they were tough. Mike finally reached his daughter, positioning himself between her and Blade with a movement so smooth it seemed choreographed. He was close enough now that everyone could see his face clearly. There was no mistake. This was Iron Mike Tyson, the man who had terrorized boxing rings for decades, who had knocked out opponents in seconds, who had bitten off a piece of Evander Holyfield's ear in the heat of battle. And he was looking at Blade with an expression that made the gang leader's blood run cold. So, Mike said conversationally, as if discussing the weather, His tone was almost friendly, which somehow made it more terrifying. Blade tried to recover his composure. He was a gang leader, after all. He had a reputation to maintain. Look, man, I didn't know she was your... Mike held up a hand, silencing him. You didn't know that's your defense? You didn't know whose daughter you were assaulting, so that makes it okay? The logic was inescapable, and Blade had no answer. Mike continued, his voice still calm, but with an edge that could cut steel. Let me tell you something about respect, since you seem confused about what it means. Respect isn't something you take by force. It's not something you get by scaring people weaker than you. Real respect is earned by how you treat people who can't fight back. He took a step closer to Blade, who instinctively took a step back. The movement didn't go unnoticed. The crowd saw it. Tank and Razor saw it. Most importantly, Blade himself felt it. The involuntary retreat of a man who suddenly realized he was outmatched. "You put your hands on my daughter," Mike said, and now there was steel in his voice. "You shoved her. You humiliated her in front of all these people. You made her feel small." Another step forward. Blade took another step back. And you know what the worst part is? All these people were too afraid of you to help her. A 15-year-old girl, and not one adult stepped in, because you've spent so long terrorizing this neighborhood that you've made cowards of good people. The crowd shifted uncomfortably. The truth hurt, but it needed to be said. Mike's words weren't just for Blade. They were for everyone. "But here's the thing about bullies," Mike continued. And now he was close enough that Blade could see the legendary intensity in his eyes, the same look that had preceded countless knockouts. Bullies are only tough when they're picking on people who can't fight back. But what happens when they meet someone who can? Blade tried to summon his courage. "Look, Mr. Tyson, I didn't mean any disrespect. We were just—" Mike's hand shot out, not to strike, but to grip Blade's vest. The movement was so fast that Blade didn't even have time to flinch. Mike pulled him close, their faces inches apart. "Just what?" Mike's voice was a whisper now, but everyone in the parking lot could hear it in the absolute silence. "Just terrorizing a child? Just showing off for your friends? Just proving how tough you are by picking on someone a third your size?" Blade's tough guy facade was crumbling. Up close, facing a legend, feeling the raw power in that grip, he was just a scared man who'd made a terrible mistake. "I'm sorry," he stammered. "I didn't know." Mike released him with a slight push, and Blade stumbled backward. "There it is again. You didn't know. Let me make something crystal clear to you and everyone here. It shouldn't matter whose daughter she is. It shouldn't matter if her father is a boxer or a banker or a bus driver. What you did was wrong. Period." The crowd was completely silent, hanging on every word. Parents held their children close, but now they were watching with something like hope. Maybe, just maybe, someone was finally going to stand up to the terror that had plagued their neighborhood. Mike turned slightly, addressing the crowd without taking his eyes fully off Blade. "How long has this been going on? How long have these guys been running roughshod over this neighborhood?" A few people exchanged glances, but no one spoke. Fear was a hard habit to break. Mike nodded, understanding. "That's what I thought. Well, let me tell you all something. Fear is a choice. I know that sounds simple, but it's true. You give bullies power by being afraid of them." He turned back to Blade, who was now visibly sweating despite the cool afternoon air. "You know what real power is? Real power is discipline. It's control. It's knowing you could hurt someone but choosing not to. It's protecting people weaker than you, not preying on them." Tank and Razor had backed up even further, clearly wanting no part of whatever was about to happen. They'd signed up to intimidate shopkeepers and shake down small business owners, not to face off against the boxing legend. "We should go, boss," Razor said nervously. "We should definitely go right now." But Mike wasn't done. "No, I don't think so. I think you all need to learn a lesson today. The same lesson you were trying to teach my daughter." He rolled his shoulders, a small movement that somehow conveyed immense threat. It was the movement of a fighter loosening up, preparing for action. The crowd recognized it. Blade definitely recognized it. "Mr. Tyson," Blade said, his voice cracking slightly. "Please, I made a mistake. A big mistake. I'm sorry. We'll leave right now and never come back, I swear. Mike tilted his head, considering. You'll leave and never come back. That's your solution? What about all the people you've terrorized? What about the shopkeepers you've extorted? What about the kids you've scared? Blade had no answer. His earlier bravado had completely evaporated. He was just a man now, facing consequences for the first time in years. I'll make it right, he said desperately. I'll apologize to everyone. I'll pay back what we took. Just please, don't. Mike held up his hand again. Don't what? Don't do to you what you were about to do to my daughter? Don't use my size and strength to intimidate you. Don't make you feel small and helpless. The irony wasn't lost on anyone. Blade nodded miserably. Yes, please. Mike was quiet for a long moment, and in that silence, the crowd could almost hear him thinking, weighing options, deciding fates. Finally, he spoke. You know what the difference is between me and you? When I stepped into a ring, it was against someone who chose to be there. Someone who trained, who prepared, who had a chance. I never picked on people who couldn't defend themselves. He paused, letting that sink in. But you're a coward who gets his kicks from scaring people. And cowards need to be taught lessons they won't forget. Before Blade could react, Mike's hand shot out again, this time grabbing him by the collar and lifting him slightly off his feet. The display of raw strength was shocking. Blade was not a small man, but Mike held him like he weighed nothing. Here's what's going to happen, Mike said, his voice deadly calm. You're gonna apologize to my daughter. A real apology, not some scared mumbling. Then you're gonna apologize to every person in this parking lot. Then you and your little friends are gonna leave this neighborhood and never come back. Blade nodded frantically. Yes, anything you say. Mike set him down but didn't release his collar. And if I ever hear about you bothering anyone in this neighborhood again, if I hear about you so much as looking at someone the wrong way, I will find you. And when I do, we'll have a very different conversation. Do you understand me? I understand, Blade gasped. I swear, you'll never hear about us again. Mike finally released him, and Blade nearly collapsed. His legs were shaking so badly he could barely stand. The man who had terrorized an entire neighborhood was reduced to a trembling mess in less than 5 minutes. Now, apologize to my daughter, Mike commanded. Blade turned to Michaela, who stood behind her father watching with wide eyes. I'm sorry, he said, and to his credit, he sounded genuine. I'm really sorry. I was wrong. I was cruel. I had no right to treat you that way. Michaela looked at her father, who nodded slightly. She turned back to Blade. I forgive you, she said quietly. But you need to be better. You need to use your strength to help people, not hurt them. The wisdom in her words, coming from a 15-year-old girl who'd just been assaulted, was profound. Several people in the crowd wiped at their eyes. Blade nodded, unable to meet her gaze. I will, I promise. Mike gestured to the crowd. Now apologize to them. Blade turned to face the assembled parents, teachers, and students. His face was red with shame. I'm sorry, he said, his voice carrying across the parking lot. I'm sorry for everything. For scaring you, for taking your money, for making you afraid in your own neighborhood. I was wrong. I'll make it right. The crowd was silent, processing this unprecedented moment. The man who had ruled through fear was publicly humbling himself. Mike wasn't satisfied yet. Tank, Razor, you two have something to say? The two gang members looked at each other, then quickly nodded. We're sorry too, Tank said. We'll stay away. You have our word. Mike studied them for a moment, then nodded. See that you do, because if you don't, you won't be dealing with scared shopkeepers and parents. You'll be dealing with me. The threat hung in the air, clear and undeniable. All three gang members nodded vigorously. Now get out of here, Mike said, and remember what I said. I'll be watching. Blade didn't need to be told twice. He practically ran to his motorcycle, Tank and Razor right behind him. Their hands shook as they started their engines. The bikes that had arrived with such aggressive thunder now left with the whine of retreat, disappearing down the street at high speed. As the sound of their engines faded, the parking lot remained silent for another moment. Then, slowly, applause began. It started with the little boy who'd asked his mother why no one was helping. He clapped his small hands together, the sound sharp in the quiet. His mother joined him, tears streaming down her face. Then another parent, and another, until the entire parking lot was filled with applause. Mike turned to face them, looking uncomfortable with the attention. "You don't need to thank me," he said. "You just need to remember that bullies only have power if you give it to them." The teacher who tried to intervene stepped forward. "Mr. Tyson, thank you. We've been dealing with them for months. The police couldn't do anything without witnesses, and everyone was too afraid to come forward." Mike nodded. "I understand fear, but I also understand that sometimes you have to stand up, even when you're scared. That's what real courage is." He turned to his daughter, his expression softening. "You okay, baby girl? Really okay?" Michaela nodded, and now that the danger had passed, tears began to flow. "I was so scared, Dad, but I remembered what you taught me. Stay calm, don't escalate, wait for the right moment." Mike pulled her into a hug, and the crowd watched as the baddest man on the planet held his daughter with infinite gentleness. "You did perfect," he murmured. "I'm so proud of you. You showed more courage than most adults would have." The businessman who'd almost stepped forward approached hesitantly. "Mr. Tyson, I'm ashamed. I almost helped, but I was afraid. I have kids of my own, and I just stood there." Mike looked at him, and there was no judgment in his eyes. "Don't beat yourself up. Fear is natural, but now you know you can overcome it. Next time, and I hope there isn't a next time, you'll remember this moment. You'll remember that bullies are just people, and people can be stood up to." The man nodded, visibly moved. "Thank you, I won't forget." Other parents began to approach, thanking Mike, apologizing for their inaction, promising to be braver in the future. Mike spoke with each of them, offering encouragement, understanding, and wisdom earned through decades of facing his own demons and fears. Finally, the crowd began to disperse, parents taking their children home, teachers returning to the school, life slowly returning to normal. But everyone knew that something had changed. The fear that had gripped the neighborhood had been broken, shattered by one man's willingness to stand up for what was right. Mike and Michaela walked back to his SUV, her hand in his. "Dad," she said quietly, "thank you for coming." Mike smiled. "Baby girl, I'll always come. Always. That's what fathers do." They reached the vehicle, and Mike opened the passenger door for her. As she climbed in, she paused. "Do you think they'll really stay away?" Mike considered the question seriously. "I think so. Bullies like that, once their facade is broken, they rarely rebuild it. They'll find somewhere else to go, somewhere they haven't been humiliated. But if they don't, if they come back, we'll deal with it." He closed her door and walked around to the driver's side. Before getting in, he looked back at the school, at the parking lot where minutes ago his daughter had been assaulted. His jaw tightened, and for a moment, the legendary fighter was visible in his expression. Then he took a breath, let it out, and climbed into the SUV. As they drove away, Michaela looked at her father. "Dad, can I ask you something?" Mike glanced at her. "Anything." She was quiet for a moment, gathering her thoughts. "You could have hurt them, really hurt them, but you didn't. Why?" Mike smiled, and it was a smile full of hard-won wisdom. "Because real strength isn't about how much damage you can do. It's about how much damage you could do, but choose not to. Those guys learned their lesson without me having to throw a single punch. That's the best kind of victory." Michaela nodded slowly, processing this. "Is that why you never hit back when people said mean things about you? When they made fun of your voice or your past?" Mike's smile faded slightly, replaced by a more serious expression. "People will always talk, baby girl. They'll always judge. But their words only have power if you give them power. I learned that the hard way, after years of letting anger control me. Now, I choose peace when I can, and action only when I must. They drove in comfortable silence for a few minutes, the afternoon sun casting long shadows across the road. Finally, Michaela spoke again. "I want to be strong like you, Dad. Not just physically, but the way you stayed calm back there. The way you controlled the situation without losing control of yourself." Mike reached over and squeezed her hand. "You already are strong, baby girl. You stood up to those guys even when you were scared. You kept your dignity even when they tried to take it from you. That's real strength." Michaela smiled, the first genuine smile since the incident. "Thanks, Dad." As they continued driving, Mike's phone buzzed. He glanced at it at a red light. It was a text from the school principal, thanking him and asking if Michaela was okay. Word had spread fast. He texted back a brief response, then put the phone away. "You're going to be famous at school tomorrow," he said with a slight grin. Michaela groaned. "Great, just what I wanted. Everyone's staring at me, asking questions." Mike laughed. "That's the price of having a famous dad, I'm afraid. But hey, at least no one's going to mess with you anymore." Michaela had to admit that was true. "I guess there are worse problems to have." They pulled into their driveway, and as they got out of the SUV, Michaela paused. "Dad, do you think what you said back there will make a difference? About people standing up to bullies?" Mike looked at his daughter. This young woman who was growing up so fast, who was already showing the kind of character that took some people a lifetime to develop. "I hope so, baby girl. I really hope so." But change doesn't happen overnight. It takes time and courage and people willing to do the right thing even when it's hard. He put his arm around her shoulders as they walked to the front door. "But if even one person remembers what happened today and finds the courage to stand up next time they see someone being bullied, then it was worth it." Inside, Michaela went to clean up her scraped elbow while Mike sat in his living room, thinking about the afternoon's events. He'd faced countless opponents in the ring, had been in situations that would terrify most people, but nothing had ever made his blood boil quite like seeing his daughter on the ground, hurt and humiliated. He'd shown restraint today, and he was proud of that. The old Mike, the one ruled by rage and impulse, might have handled things very differently. But he'd grown, learned, evolved. He'd learned that true power was in control, not chaos. His phone buzzed again. This time it was a news alert. Somehow, someone had recorded part of the confrontation and posted it online. The video was already going viral. Mike watched it, seeing himself through others' eyes. He saw the moment he'd stepped out of the SUV, the way the crowd had parted, the fear in Blade's eyes. He saw himself lifting Blade by the collar, saw the raw display of strength, but he also saw the restraint, the control, the way he'd chosen words over violence. The comments were overwhelmingly positive. People were calling him a hero, praising him for standing up for his daughter, for teaching a lesson without throwing a punch. Some comments made him smile, others made him think. One comment in particular caught his eye. It was from a parent who'd been in the parking lot. "I was there. I'm ashamed to say I didn't help, but watching Mike Tyson today taught me something. It's not about being the strongest or the toughest. It's about being willing to stand up when it matters. Next time, I won't hesitate. Thank you, Mike Tyson, for reminding us what real strength looks like." Mike read the comment twice, then set his phone down. That was it. That was the whole point. Not to be a hero, not to show off, but to inspire others to find their own courage. Michaela came back downstairs, her elbow bandaged. "Dad, you're all over the internet." Mike sighed. "I saw. That's the world we live in now. Everyone has a camera." She sat down next to him. "Are you upset about it?" Mike thought about it. "No, not really. If it helps people, if it makes even one person braver, then I guess it's okay." They sat together in comfortable silence, father and daughter, both processing the events of the day in their own ways. Outside, the sun was setting, painting the sky in shades of orange and purple. It had been quite an afternoon. Later that evening, as Michaela was doing her homework at the kitchen table, there was a knock at the door. Mike answered it to find several of his neighbors standing there. "Mike," one of them said, a middle-aged woman named Carol who lived 3 houses down. "We just wanted to thank you. Those guys have been terrorizing our neighborhood for months. You did what we should have done a long time ago." Mike shook his head. "You don't need to thank me. I was just protecting my daughter." Another neighbor, an elderly man named Frank, spoke up. "It was more than that. You showed us that we don't have to live in fear. We're organizing a neighborhood watch. We're going to take back our streets." Mike smiled. "That's good. That's really good. Just remember, the goal isn't to become bullies yourselves. It's to create a community where everyone feels safe." Carol nodded. "We understand. And we wanted you to know, if Michaela ever needs anything, if you ever need anything, we're here. We're a community again, thanks to you." After they left, Mike closed the door and leaned against it, a small smile on his face. Maybe he had made a difference. Maybe today mattered. In the weeks that followed, the neighborhood did change. The watch group that formed kept an eye out for trouble. Parents were more involved, more present. The school implemented new anti-bullying programs, and Blade, Tank, and Razor were never seen again. They'd moved on to easier targets, or perhaps they'd learned their lesson. Either way, they were gone. Michaela returned to school the next day to find herself something of a celebrity. Kids wanted to hear the story firsthand. Teachers checked on her constantly. It was overwhelming at first, but she handled it with grace, always emphasizing not what her father had done, but what she'd learned from the experience. The real lesson, she told one class during a special assembly about bullying, isn't that my dad is famous or strong. It's that we all have the power to stand up to bullies. We all have the power to choose courage over fear. The principal, watching from the back of the auditorium, wiped at her eyes. This young girl, who'd been victimized just days ago, was now inspiring others. That was the real victory. Mike watched the video of Michaela's speech that evening, his heart swelling with pride. She'd taken a terrible experience and turned it into something positive, something that could help others. That was true strength. That was the legacy he wanted to leave. As he turned off his phone and prepared for bed, Mike reflected on the day that had changed so much. He'd been called many things in his life: champion, fighter, legend, baddest man on the planet. But today, the title that mattered most was the simplest one: father. And in that role, he'd done what fathers are supposed to do. He'd protected his child. He'd taught a lesson. He'd made the world a little bit safer, a little bit better. The next morning, Mike woke to find Michaela already up, making breakfast. "Morning, Dad," she said cheerfully. "Morning, baby girl. You're up early." She shrugged. "Couldn't sleep. Too much on my mind." Mike poured himself coffee and sat at the kitchen table. "Want to talk about it?" Michaela brought over 2 plates of eggs and toast, sitting across from him. "I've been thinking about what you said, about real strength being control, not chaos." Mike nodded, waiting for her to continue. "I want to learn," she said, "not just self-defense, though that too, but I want to learn how to stay calm under pressure, how to control my emotions, how to be strong like you." Mike smiled. "You already are strong, baby girl, but if you want to train, I'd be honored to teach you." And so began a new chapter, father and daughter, training together, not just in physical techniques, but in the mental discipline that true strength requires. They worked on breathing exercises, on staying calm when adrenaline surged, on reading situations and people. Michaela proved to be a quick study, absorbing not just the techniques, but the philosophy behind them. Months passed, and the incident in the parking lot became a story, then a memory, then a lesson that shaped who Michaela would become. She grew stronger, more confident, but never arrogant. She used her experience to help others, to stand up for kids who were being bullied, to create a culture of respect and dignity at her school. Mike watched her grow with pride, knowing that the real victory that day hadn't been in facing down 3 gang members. The real victory was in raising a daughter who understood that strength without compassion was just violence, that power without purpose was just destruction. One evening, nearly a year after the incident, Mike and Michaela were training in their home gym. She'd just successfully completed a complex defensive sequence, and Mike nodded his approval. "Good. You're getting really good at this." Michaela smiled, catching her breath. "I had a good teacher." They sat down to rest, and Michaela looked at her father thoughtfully. "Dad, can I ask you something?" Mike handed her a water bottle. "Always." She took a drink, then spoke. "That day, in the parking lot, were you scared?" Mike considered the question seriously. "Scared? No, not exactly. But I was angry. Angrier than I've been in years. When I saw you on the ground, saw that man standing over you, something in me just—" He trailed off, searching for words. "It took everything I had not to lose control, to remember that violence should always be the last resort, not the first." Michaela nodded slowly. "I was scared, really scared, but I remembered what you taught me. That fear is just a feeling, and feelings don't have to control us." Mike pulled her into a side hug. "And that's why I'm so proud of you. You faced your fear and didn't let it break you. That's real courage." They sat together in comfortable silence, the bond between them stronger than ever. Outside, the sun was setting again, painting the sky in familiar shades of orange and purple. Another day ending, another lesson learned. In the neighborhood around them, life went on. Kids played in yards without fear. Parents walked to corner stores without looking over their shoulders. The community that had been fractured by fear was whole again, stronger for having faced its demons and won. And in one house, a father and daughter sat together, both understanding that the real victory wasn't in the confrontation, wasn't in the viral video or the news stories that followed. The real victory was in the quiet moments like this, in the lessons learned and the strength built, in the knowledge that when it mattered most, they'd stood together and done what was right. Mike Tyson had been many things in his life: a troubled youth, a champion boxer, a controversial figure, a man who'd made mistakes and learned from them. But in the end, the role he was proudest of was the simplest and most important one. He was a father who taught his daughter that real strength isn't about how hard you can hit. It's about staying calm when others lose control. It's about choosing peace when you have the power to choose war. It's about protecting those who can't protect themselves, not preying on them. And most importantly, it's about understanding that the baddest man on the planet isn't the one who can do the most damage. It's the one who can do damage, but chooses not to, who uses his strength to lift others up rather than tear them down. That was the lesson Blade learned that day in the parking lot. That was the lesson the neighborhood learned. And that was the lesson that would echo forward, changing lives in ways big and small, all because one father stood up for his daughter and showed the world what real strength looks like.